Hi.
Hey, y'all. Well, we're here just a little bit after our Herbert Family Undergraduate Lecture Series performance, which we enjoyed greatly. Thank you for coming to that. I am Dr. Richard J. Reddick, and this is,
Dr. Lisa B. Thompson,
and we are the hosts of
Black
Black
Austin
Austin
Matters.
Matters, which is on KUT 90.5 every other Thursday, 8:51 a.m. and 3:51 p.m. And of course, wherever you get your podcasts. So you did us a great favor of giving these wonderful questions for us to ask and answer. So we're going to have a dialogue about this, and you can check it out and you can tell us what you think. So Dr. Thompson, do you want to go first with the first question?
Yeah, we had a great question from a student that said, "What do you think is the best way for mainstream media, television, film, etc.?" If we didn't mention radio, but we're going to throw it in there. Make an impact on the community. What do you think?
Oh, it's a good question. I think actually having people from communities tell their stories is essential, right? So Black Austin Matters is a labor of love that we have done because we are part of a community. We're not coming in saying, look at this fascinating community. We are part of the community. And obviously, we've interviewed a number of people that we know or we are familiar with or we have some proximity to because of our engagement in the community. To me, that's been a very important part of the story. So authenticity matters, right? Getting people to tell stories with people who appreciate the stories and take the time to understand their stories versus, I don't know anything about your community. I don't know anything what you're about, but here's something I want to talk about. To me, that seems a little bit, um, inappropriate. I think it's important to make sure you have those connections to the communities.
Absolutely. I think that the best way for mainstream media to make an impact, they make an impact. It could be. I like to choose what kind of impact it should be. Let's say that because it's happening all the time. But I would like to see mainstream media making an impact that is what you're talking about, more truthful representation of a community and a fuller one. I think a truer one is a fuller one. So
Mhm.
I think it's important for those who are making media to kind of think who's missing. Who
Yeah.
have we heard from? Let's add them to their story, whether it's a fictional or nonfiction, autobiographical, or what is it? My favorite are doing documentaries.
Yeah, documentaries,
Sure, we
definitely.
fill in the stories that haven't been told.
Yeah, and I think who's gatekeeping, right? Who's keeping people from accessing who isn't part of the conversation is really important. A lot of times that is a critique of mainstream. Well, you have to have these credentials and this experience to be part of this conversation. We came to this with very little experience podcasting, i.e., none. And I think from the feedback we get from our colleagues in the community, it's making an impact. So I think that's an important thing too.
Absolutely. You got a question?
Yeah. So here's a question. It's a great question. How were the starting stages of your KUT podcast and radio talk show? Did you already have a theme and some interviewees in mind, or were you originally starting with something different?
That's a great question. It's we're gonna keep saying that
Keep on
because
saying that.
you're so brilliant here at UT. That's what I tell people all the time. We're
Facts.
lucky to be teaching these folks and having them teach me as well. But I think that it really began as how we what's happened is what we envisioned, but what the impact of it has shifted. The idea of bringing people from across Austin to be heard by their neighbors in the city that weren't most, our determination was definitely not to be focused on people who were at the university. We wanted to broaden it way beyond that, and I think we've done a great job of doing that. But the impact has just been bigger. I didn't realize we were actually doing, in some way, archiving a moment in history in the city.
Yeah, I co-sign on that completely. I think we envisioned a number of the people when we very first started that we want to talk to these people, or we want to talk to people who do these kinds of things in the community. So that definitely has happened. Like you said, the response has been something that I was not ready for, and we had a great experience of thinking about, aloud as an interview process about our next season, and to me, it's exciting, like because to quote Joe Strummer from The Clash, the future is unwritten, right? I mean, so we get to sort of figure this out together. But I think with everything you said, I agree with.
Oh, and what surprised you the most through the process of producing and hosting your podcast?
Um, yeah, so I think the surprises were the fact that we've gone through this process, and we don't have 100% agreement on everything, but for the most part, our visions are very much aligned. I don't think we ever had a manifesto discussion. We should be doing this, that, and the other. It's kind of organically developed, and there's always this idea that, well, what point are we going to have a sort of a falling out, or we're going to have a clash that just can't be overcome? And every time we've kind of developed at the same time, I think, and we've always also been true to what we're trying to get done in this. So I think just the fact that we have been able to do this and really stay firmly in each other's vision and not feel like, well, you're going this direction when I don't like it, and vice versa. I think every time we have an inflection point, we discuss it, we talk about it, and then we have Miles in our ear, we have Matt in our ear, we have Antoinette in our ear, just sort of saying, well, what about this? What about that? So that's always been a very it's been great to have that experience where we were just evolving together, and it's going in a way that I think we both agree that's going in a positive direction.
Yes, and I was surprised to find how hard it is to organize your questions in a logical way. So it's great
Yes.
having our producer Miles
Miles.
pull us through that. And I didn't realize just how many people would say yes.
Yeah.
Everyone we asked said yes. I know one person didn't said next season, so hopefully we'll get them next season. They're so busy, but for the most part, people are really excited about it. So that was a nice thing.
I agree. Okay, so my question is a good one. Keep on saying that. Anyway, what advice do you have for someone looking to start their own platform or podcast?
Ooh, I think we both agree on this. Find yourself a team that will support you, because doing
Mm,
it all on your own, I can't imagine us doing this without the producing partners we have, and that's huge. And also know what the story you want to tell, or the story you want to help some others tell. But it's important to be clear about that.
yeah, I think I agree, of course, but I also think something we talked about in our last podcast was just following your muse, right? For some people, you'll want to do something that's really well produced. Like sometimes you want to get on YouTube and on TikTok and just do your thing, right? So I think also understand that there are a lot of iterations of sort of building your own platform, and our platforms have been built over many years, right?
Yes.
The platform I would have had when I was 19, 18 years old is quite different than what I would have today. So that's part of the process. Like, think about this as development. Like, whatever you're doing and working on is building on something else and will build on the next thing you do. So, you know, feel free to follow your muse and know that whatever you do in the next stage is going to be something that's going to build on what you did before.
Yes, absolutely. Is it my turn or your turn? I can't remember.
I think it's your turn.
Ooh, this is a great question. I wanted to ask this. Podcast today, what tomorrow? How do you see this brand growing? Is film an aspect you'd like to add to Black Austin Matters? How about igniting that outlet in other states? Could this be a national brand?
Dr.
Whew,
Thompson,
that
is
is
this
good.
your question?
Um,
uh,
he's saying that because I'm like always like, follow me. I got an idea.
this is true. I think it's a great idea. I mean, I think right now, one of the things that's really exciting about the work we're doing is that we're doing other things. Like we are very busy. Dr. Thompson is a visiting professor at the New School and doing amazing things. And so, I think
And
it's
Dr.
really,
Reddick has a little new job right now.
yeah, I'm trying to do some things,
Senior Vice
uh,
President for Education right now at UT.
yeah. So we have a lot going on. So there's a lot I think that we have happening in our lives, both professionally and personally. We're raising children. We're doing all these wonderful things. Uh, so in my mind, I really like where we're at with the podcast. And honestly, one thing that's been really exciting is the fact that I see people in other spaces attaching to it. I didn't think that was going to happen. I thought, yeah, maybe one person will listen to, you know, the podcast that we know from another place, but we get tweeted at, we get, social media mentions from people who don't live in Austin who are interested in the show. So I do think one thing we had talked about with our production team is like other NPR stations have interest in what we're doing, even not in Austin. And like, why would they be interested in what's happening in Austin? But it's about more about having these authentic community-based stories with community-based folks. So I think that's definitely something that we can see going on further. Someone wants to come to the camera and film something with us. Hey, have at it. I'm up for that for sure.
Bring it on. We're game.
Okay. How about answering this question? In what ways has this journey helped you grow as an individual?
You know what? I'm going to confess something. It's helped me to like the sound of my voice more.
Yeah.
And so it's, you bopping along, and all of a sudden you hear yourself on the radio. You're like, whoa! And it's very sweet to do that, especially with the smart speakers. I didn't realize that was an option that you can just say to a smart speaker, play Black Austin Matters podcast or any other podcast, and it will come on.
Yeah.
That's been kind of lovely, but lovely for me. What about you?
Yeah.
It's been
I would agree. I mean, I think the very first time we heard ourselves on the radio, I was cringing. I'm like, oh my God. First, you're excited because I'm on the radio. You're like, is that what I sound like? Uh, and then you realize, that is what I sound like. And it's got studio magic on it and everything like that. But yeah, I think that's one thing I thought, being more at ease of who I am, which is something I wasn't expecting. Like, that's what my voice sounds like. And it actually sounds pretty decent. And the wildest thing, which I know we both had this experience where people have said, I heard your voice and I recognize your voice from the radio. I'm like, oh my
yes,
God. Like I heard you talking across the room. I knew it was you.
yes.
That's really cool. So yeah, that was definitely, I guess, a little self-confidence thing. I think people will be surprised, even as a faculty member, I have some insecurities about public speaking and those kinds of things. And it's helped me kind of, you can do this okay. You can go up there and sound halfway educated at the
It's
right speed, not speak too fast, all those
yeah.
things.
That's been really a wonderful part of the journey. To self discovery. I love that. Now, turning to something more serious that really actually was part of the reason why we have this podcast is the murder of George Floyd, and we have a question. Why was George Floyd's death so impactful despite his history and the circumstances surrounding his death?
Yeah, that's a powerful question. Obviously, we talked about this a lot in the actual. I don't know if we talked in the podcast or in our lecture, but it's
Mm.
somewhere we talked about this. I think it was just yet another example of the senselessness of the loss of life of Black men, Black women, Latino men, Latina women,
Children.
uh, children, unprovoked and undeserved. The role of the police is to serve and protect, not to serve as judge and jury. And everybody in this country is entitled to the legal processes. So if you've done something you shouldn't have done, if that's the case, and let's just assume that's actually the case, because sometimes people get arrested and so forth for things they did not do. But if that is in fact the case, those people deserve the respect and the same constitutional rights that everybody else has. And why is it that we've seen in our lifetimes? I'm raising a 15-year-old tomorrow son,
Oh,
and a 12-year-old daughter. In their lifetimes, there have been many examples of people of color, and to your point, Lisa, children killed extrajudiciously. And we know this has happened since the inception of this country. We know that's happened. But to know that it's happening in the 21st century when we're proclaiming advancements in civil rights, because we have these new civil rights tools right in our hands, we can now capture things, and now people are like, wow, that actually did happen. So y'all have been making this up, right? Because a lot of times people will say, oh, well, that person did something they should have, that deserved this. And to see it, I think, in 9 minutes to unfold, to watch somebody's life expire, it had to have an impact on you. And I know a lot of people who kind of, oh, well, police brutality, that's a thing, but couldn't either finish watching it or could not believe what they were seeing. The callous disregard for this man's life, life. We're not talking about his liberty. We're not talking about his right, his life. So it was a watershed moment for many of us, I think, because many of us who've lived in life in the skin have known these things to happen, but many who did not were seeing it vividly. And I think that made everybody think we can't continue like this. Now, I always feel like we're good at being very present about those things and we kind of forget things. But the sustainability and the continuity of Black Lives Matter and sort of remembering George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Armin Arbery and so many others, I think is instructive because the only way you get better is to do better, right? And we don't get better unless we really commit to understanding and sitting with that incredible discomfort and pain, especially those of us who don't live with it every single day. You and I are the parents of Black children. We live in fear of that continually. For people who don't, it became very vivid, I think, for a moment. I'm curious what you think about that question.
I love the fact that our students are thinking about this and making the connection between the podcast and the death of George Floyd. I would say that it's impactful because I think for once the entire nation was brought to a standstill. That had nothing to do with um, that was quiet, right? So it was a quiet movement of this horrible virus. But I've been in situations before where there was I lived through the LA uprisings, so most people call the LA riots.
Same.
During that time in LA, and at the time you're trying to find things you need before there's a curfew. You're caught up in that, and people were paying attention. But this was a different kind of moment where you couldn't help it, and also you have a different technology. The Rodney King beating was also because of technology. We were able to see what happened to him. Another thing people kind of dismiss based on, oh, must have been something really horrible the person did. Again, I love your point about they are not executioners. We remind ourselves that there's no imminent danger to their lives. There's no reason for this to be going on. And it was helpful. It was the first time people who are dear friends to me who are not Black reached out. And I think that they realized that they had not been paying attention in a way they should be and didn't really know me that they thought the way they thought they did. So I think that the only way our country can be what we want it to be is for us to have honest and clear and conversations about justice, and own up to the fact that sometimes people do know this is going on and really don't believe that everybody deserves justice, and that's an important conversation to have too. So I just want to um, live in a world where I don't have to worry about a dear friend's child being able to kill my child with impunity. So that's the world we live in right now. I don't think that they want that or I want that. So we need to figure out a way to change the way in which our world deals with particularly our nation deals with um, race. And I'm looking forward to seeing this generation that we're teaching how
Yeah,
they change the world. Because what happens here
changes the world.
does, it really does.
So, what inspired you to focus on representation early in your career?
I think I was just really struck by what saw or didn't see in fiction, from literature, television, and film, and what I knew and loved in my community, in my world. I'm like, these two things don't really jive. What's going on here? So I was really fascinated with that, and I also was very fascinated with the Black middle class, or people with with privilege, because I really did not know them. I thought we were privileged. So I got to college and found out. I guess we were not working class.
Right.
I thought, we were fine. We had food. We had car. We had all this stuff. We had a house, and didn't realize that so other students who looked like me did not share a room with their two brothers at any
Right.
time in their lives, or wait to get a car until they were in college. So it was fascinating to me to think about that and how in Black literature and film and in popular culture and theater and all the other ways, how we present black middle and upper class people and these particular kind of stereotypical ways. And I wanted to kind of unpack that. So that was that's what fascinated me. And now I've gone on to think about, um, as a black feminist artist and scholar, how to create my own representations of black life. And that's been probably the greatest joy to be able to do that.
Yeah, in a different way, my academic work looks at the presence of Black people and people of color generally in higher education. And I do that work because I was enthralled and amazed when I first encountered a Black faculty member. I can still remember having classes with Dr. George Wright, who taught me American history. And I was like, wow, there's a Black man in front of this classroom of 200 people in just the auditorium at 8 o'clock in the morning on Tuesdays and Thursdays, um, telling us things about the history that I didn't learn in high school. And I was transfixed by that. And then I had a professor named Kermit Campbell who taught a class on hip hop in 1993 here at UT. And I was
Hey.
like, oh, this is gonna be dope. I'm gonna have a class on hip hop between Rap City and Young TV Raps. I'm gonna, just be jamming all the time. And I'm like, oh, this is a rigorous class. I got to read books and I write papers. And one of the most empowering things I did, I think, when I got tenure, I actually looked up uh, Professor Campbell. And I remember his name because, I'm Jamaican and Kermit is a very Jamaican sounding name, right? I have
Yes.
an Uncle Kermit, right? So I said, Kermit hip hop, boom, there he is, Kermit Campbell. I'm going to send him an email, get ready to send him an email. I said, you know what? Let me call this dude's office and, leave a message for him. He's at Colgate. And so I look up his number and I call the number and he picks up. It's summertime. Faculty are in the office at summertime.
Yeah.
He picked the phone up. And I said, is this Professor Campbell? And he's like, yes, it is. Who's this? I said, my name is Richard Reddick. I was a student of yours back in 93. And he's like, Richard Reddick. Oh my goodness. Oh my gosh. I do remember you, man. How are you doing, brother? How are you? I said, I'm doing great. He said, what are you doing nowadays? I said, I'm an associate professor at UT Austin. And it was just silent for like a pause. He's like, oh man, you just made my day. You just made my year. And you need to let people know their presence matters, right? Because something in my mind when I had him in class said to me, I never actually articulated the idea of being a faculty member, not until I was in grad school. But I think seeing him made it a possible thing. It was in the universe of possibility for me through Dr. Wright, through Dr. Campbell, and through, of course, my mentor, rest in power, Dr. Charles Willie. They made it possible for me to think at one. And again, it happened subtextually. I wasn't saying, professor, that's me. I didn't have the grades. I'm like, nah, they don't want me teaching any classes. But over time, I started thinking like, wow. So I've always been invested in making sure those stories are told and shared because the stories are amazing. And honestly, this is my advice to students. If you're ever stuck and you're like, man, this professor, I don't know about this professor, I'm trying to go to office hours and ask them about how they got to where they are.
Ooh, yes.
Autopilot. They're going to talk to you. They're like, look, I've heard enough. Please, I got to leave. But the point is, people have stories of origin that are amazing. A lot of times you might think they were born with a silver spoon in their mouth and they were speaking with 3-syllable words when they were born. A lot of times you hear a lot of struggle, a lot of self-doubt, a lot of imposter syndrome. And hopefully that makes it feel more accessible to you, whether you want to be a faculty member or you want to do something else. Hearing somebody's journey may empower you to do the same kind of pathway yourself.
Wow, that's a great answer. I love that. So I think we have time for one last question.
Yeah.
Let me see, which one should it be? There's so many left. Well, not well. Let's see. What is your day-to-day life like as a researcher in your field? How is it to write, do research, and educate those on our community? That's a great.
Wow. It is once again, it's a great question.
Yeah.
Um, but so here's the thing I will say. It's the greatest privilege, I think, to have that ability to do that. Many years ago, I've interviewed a professor named Tommy Shelby. He's a philosopher at Harvard.
Harvard. Harvard.
Yes, I love
I love
Dr. Shelby. And he was talking about the life of the mind. And I was a graduate student at the time when I was talking to him. So I'm like, Life of the Mind. What is that? I mean, and Dr. Shelby has the cool
Yes.
glasses and the
Yes.
tweed jacket.
He's
Brother
very,
Smooth,
yes.
very dapper. And I was like, man, that's some Ivy League stuff, man. Life of the Mind. But I think when I think about talking to faculty, staff, and students about their experiences, it's a huge honor, right? Because people have these amazing stories they tell, and our podcast is based on people telling stories, right? And a lot of times nobody even asks to ask them, like, how did you get here? What made you do the things you do? Why do you not do certain things, and why do you do other things, right?
Yeah.
So for me, it's the greatest privilege I could ever have, and we come from a tradition of the griot, right? Telling stories, communicating stories, passing along lineages. And every time I sit down and put pen to paper about scholars or students or community members, I'm always trying to be mindful of the fact that it's a huge privilege, and to make sure that what I'm writing is accessible, that I was never satisfied with getting an article in a fancy journal that nobody would read.
Mm.
I wanted it to be, I'm first generation college student, so I want my parents to read it. I want my sister to read it. I want people in my family to read this stuff because, at a certain point, um, most of us, if you have impact in your research field, you're not talking to people who do what you do. You're talking to people who are, interested community members, people who are curious about the work you're doing, working in other areas of policy and advocacy. So you're not talking to people who know what you do, so to speak. So the accessibility of the work is important, and also the responsibility, I think, to get it right, to make sure that we are not reading into what people are saying. Um, Sometimes I'll ask a question and somebody will say to me, well, you know what it's like. And I'm like, no, tell me what it's like, because what I think it's like might be different from your interpretation. And one thing that's important is like just the diversity of Black experiences, right? The diaspora is wide. My lineage is Jamaican. It's raised in the UK, raised in the United States, and so we don't have a single story, right? We have so many different stories to tell in our community. So I'm always thinking about making sure that we do find commonality, but we also talk about how different our experiences are. Let's flip
Oh,
it around to you.
I love that. It's a great way of talking about one's intellectual life and journey. For me, the day-to-day experience as a researcher is one full of discovery and generosity. So generosity, I mean by that is sharing what I'm discovering. And sometimes when you're sharing what you're discovering, you're finding out new ways to think about it. And and bringing those discoveries into the classroom. So say you take one text, Sula, which I read by Toni Morrison when I was an undergraduate. Now I'm teaching it. Now I'm writing about it in relationship to August Wilson. So it's a way in which you have this one text that's been in your life for decades. It gets to have different meanings and different ways in which you're sharing it to other people, both through your writing, through teaching, and then your research that brings you greater depth and knowledge of that particular text and the writer. There's other part of our work, like you said, which is not just teaching people in the community in the classroom, but how does their work impact the community? So whether it's doing writing op-eds, which you also have done, or for me, writing plays that deal with certain kind of topics that are in, of interest to me and to others is another way to get people to think about certain kind of complex ideas we think about as theory in ways that are accessible to everybody. And for me, it's important to also add humor to them because I think humor is,
Yeah,
I call, my funny bone or my comedy, my humor is my superpower. And what
yeah,
it does, it brings people's defenses down. And when you laugh, you often move forward. And so that's what I can get you and share with you some
facts. This is
facts.
true about you. I know that for a fact. There's a
So
crazy bright ball of light. I'm gonna just hide that right there.
no, it's perfect. But yes, but for our conversation, but we what I think people can tell about both of us is that we love to engage with other people, and that's what the classroom is about for us.
Yeah,
And the research is something we bring into the classroom to share with other people, like that ball of light coming in. and that's what I think allows for people to shine light on things that people don't know anything about, or they know little about, or that are been told the wrong thing about. That's the best thing you can do with your life is do research on the things that deserve to have light. See what I did
Right.
there?
Yeah. Light. So I know we said the last, but there's one question I do want to throw in here, and I want you to answer it, and I'll take a chance at answering it too.
Okay.
And this is the bonus question. So shout out to who had this question. What is one concrete example of systemic racism?
Oh, one. I'm going to only get to have one. Here's one. Um, I noticed when I was moving here, trying to figure out how to where to move and how where my son would go to school, and I looked and saw that the Austin School District had a policy to support those who are Black and Latino to be able to move from a predominantly Black and Latino school to a predominantly white school. Why would they want to do that? Is because those schools are heavily resourced versus the other schools. So we'll look at that and think, well, that's a lovely thing. And I think I can take advantage of that because I can drive my child to school. The systemic part of it that's, I wouldn't call it systemic racism, but is tied to race and class, is
Mhm.
that though they provide no transportation for students who make the decision to leave their neighborhood school for a school that's higher resourced. So basically, you're saying, here's this thing, but you can't get it because, and no one in the room thought about, well, how are they going to get to school? So
Right.
when I did this with my family, I noticed that there were two groups of Black students that were able to take advantage of this policy. There was the children of the janitorial staff and the staff that worked in the lunchroom because they came to school early in the morning when
Early.
their parents came
Yeah.
to school, or those who of us who have more privilege, like myself. I could set up like my classes to be after my son goes to school, so I could
Mhm.
drop him off. So, in setting that up, it's kind of it's a very um, frustrating policy. So that you're saying we're giving them the priority, but you're
Yeah,
really
we hooked you up, right?
how can you get to school if you can't get to school? If your parents have jobs, and many people have jobs that start at 8 o'clock in the morning. They
That's
can't
right.
get their kids over. So anyway, so I was just thinking about that as just one of the most recent ones that I find
Mhm.
really stunningly obtuse, and but does the job. It keeps the numbers down.
Right. Yeah, that's a great example. And obviously, a lot of my examples would come from the educational system. You know, education is a leading indicator of so many other things, life opportunities and outcomes. And if you control access to those points, then outcomes aren't that great. But I'll talk about something. There's a great book I recommend that many people read, which is called The Dream Hoarders by Richard
Yes,
Reeves. Right. So you know this book.
yes,
And,
yes.
and he talks about, quintiles, right? So socioeconomic quintiles and how people maintain their status in those quintiles by passing along unearned privileges, right? In other words, dream hoarding. And so a good example of this I will talk about is intergenerational transfer of wealth. And
Come
that's a
on.
very hard word to say for me, intergenerational.
Yes.
But think about it this way: if you had a grandparent who had a very humble beginning in the United States and perhaps was able to scrape up enough money to buy a very small house, right? Well, that meant that that grandparent could do a couple of things. They could borrow against the value of that house and maybe start a business. They could pass that house on to you or your parents as a gift on their passing, and so on and so forth. And then next thing you know, you've got a whole base, what we call wealth, right? So not income, but wealth, right? These are things that are sustaining. These are things that you can use to access more opportunities, get loans, and so on and so forth. Well, if you think about American history, the Fair Housing Act was passed in 1968. Up until that point, it was very exceedingly difficult, if not impossible, for Black people to pass along intergenerational wealth. So whether it be property, or houses or anything, it's very difficult to do that, right? So when you think about, some people say, well, everything's equal and we have the same opportunities. I always say this, my parents are the first homeowners in their family's history to
Mm,
own their own home, right? I bought a home, and it means that I have the ability to borrow against the equity of my home. I can do all kinds of things. There's opportunities for me that don't exist. If that didn't exist for you for generations, then you're already behind in so many ways, right?
yeah.
And part of privilege and advantage is the invisibility of it, right? We look at these things as being very natural and very normal. And we don't think about the fact that that person who started their own business may have had a loan secured by the fact that their parents put their house up for collateral, versus we don't have anything. So we're going to have to ask for, scrape up money by ourselves, or spend a lot of time raising money. You name all the different things it takes to do what we want to do. But that's just a small example of it. But again, we often look at the Horatio Alger myths and the self-made people in this country. And a lot of times the self-made people are the people who had access to things like intergenerational wealth,
Mhm.
property, stocks, other assets that they could apply and pass on to their children. Of course, most of you probably know this, compounding interest is a thing, right? So that meager investment back in, 1902 ends up being millions of dollars in 2022. So that's an example of it. And, I think once you start looking for examples of structural system racism, you'll find them everywhere. And I'll reference one quick thing. Um, I had the honor of serving on something called the Mayor's Task Force on Institutional Racism and Structural Inequity. And if you go on Google and look at the city of Austin, we wrote a report 75 pages long about how these things are structurally operating in our city, in housing, in education, in healthcare, and other areas. So if you're interested and you're curious about our own community, what's happening, we have that report. It came out in 2016, so it's available. I would say check it out.
And can you maybe we can make it available? Let folks know how to do
Oh
that.
yeah, I'll do some studio magic, and I'll put the link right under there. And I can actually put in things like Richard Reeves's book and stuff like that, so people know how to find it. But yeah, I just want to say, as always, I have the best time doing things with you. And we do it unrehearsed, we do it off the cuff. But it's always just I get inspired. I'm like, I want to write something now. So
I know, me too. I'm like, oh my God. And the students really inspired us this time.
yes,
Really lucky
yes.
to have these really thoughtful folks that came out. Um, and we must correct the report that was in the newspaper that, or that was how many students? It was
200.
actually, it was a total. Do you remember?
It was 1,200,
1,200.
not counting the views we got online. So here's something. If you're watching this right now, you're like, yo, this is kind of dope. Tell your friends to watch the streaming version of it. Also, our colleagues Art Mark and Bob Duke did theirs the day after. Check it out as well. You get to hear about the podcasting professors and what we do. And most importantly, check out our podcast for sure. And really importantly, if you have not taken a signature course yet, or you have friends who are coming to UT in the future, in the fall of 23, Black Austin Matters is coming to a classroom near you. We're
Yes,
teaching a signature course. So let people know that we'll be teaching on this very issue if it's interesting to you. And maybe you'll be able to come visit if you want to just come check it out.
absolutely.
Thank you
Thank,
so much.
thank you for
Hook 'em
listening.
horns.
Hook 'em.
And yeah, that's very good for a UCLA grad to be able to do that. So shout out to you.
Don't tell anybody.
But you a Longhorn now. Anyway.
Yes.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Take care. Thank you so much for listening, and we will chat with you later.
Bye.
Bye. And